Torture was considered a legal method of extracting confessions, punishing offenders, and carrying out executions during the Middle Ages. Some methods were far crueler than others, and these 10 were among the most barbaric and brutal. Number 1. The Cradle of Judas. This Italian invention, also known as the Judas chair, was particularly cruel. A prisoner would be lowered above the pyramid-shaped seat using ropes, with the point inserted into the anus or vagina. Victims would be tortured by applying intense pressure to the orifice, causing permanent damage. In many cases, the victim died as a result of rips in the muscle tissue, which later became infected. Weights were added to facilitate the effect, which frequently resulted in death by impalement. A similar effect was achieved by a device known as the Spanish donkey, or wooden horse. Victims straddled the triangular horse and were forced to rest their entire body weight on their crotch, which rested on the angle's point. Number 2. Suffering at the hands of a saw. This was a form of execution in which a living person was sawed in half through the middle of their body, either longitudinally or transversely, depending on which direction was chosen. This was accomplished by sawing the person in half either longitudinally or transversely along the length of the body. Number 3. The Pear of Anguish. During the Middle Ages, these heinous contraptions were used to torture women who were suspected of being reasonable for causing a woman to have an abortion. In addition to that, liars, blasphemers, and homosexuals could be executed with this method of execution. The device was inserted into one of the prisoner's orifices, the vagina in the case of women, the anus in the case of homosexuals, and the mouth in the case of liars and blasphemers, hence the nickname choke pear. The torturer turned the top screw, which caused the device's 4 metal leaves to gradually separate from one another and eventually fall off the device. The skin of the victim could be ripped off it, or it could be blown up to its maximum size and used to mutilate the victim, although it resulted in death only sporadically. Victims were frequently subjected to the additional forms of torture afterwards. Breaking Wheel 4. This torture device, also known as the Catherine wheel, was used to torture and kill prisoners for public executions. Typically, the device was a large wagon wheel with radial spokes. Offenders were chained to the wheel and beaten with a club or iron cudgel. The wheel's gaps allowed the limbs to give way to break. Surprisingly, the survival time after being broken can be lengthy, with some accounts of victims living for several days before succumbing to their fatal injuries. Number 5. The Iron Chair. During the Middle Ages, this torture device was widely used. Victims would be placed on the chair, which had hundreds of sharp spikes, and the iron restraint would be gradually tightened, forcing the spikes to cut deep into the flesh. This could go on for hours if not days. The spikes did not penetrate vital organs and blood loss was kept to a minimum, at least until the person was freed from the chair. Death was frequently the result. The iron chair was frequently used as a psychological torture device. Victims would frequently confess after being forced to watch other prisoners being tortured with the device. Head crushing. Quite self-explanatory. The device, which is essentially a head vice, slowly crushed the skull and facial bones. Even if the torturer stopped before death, permanent damage would be done to the facial muscles and structure. Number 7. Torture of rats. Torture has been carried out using rats. A common technique was to force a starving rat through a victim's body, usually the intestines, as a means of escape. Prisoners were completely restrained and tied to the ground or any horizontal surface to make it work. The stomach of a rat was then covered by a metallic container that was gradually heated. The rat started looking for a way out, which had to be through the victim's body. Digging through the body took several hours on average, resulting in a painful and gruesome death. Torture in a coffin. During the medieval period, this was one of the most dreaded forms of torture. The accused were placed in a caged coffin, rendering them immobile. The crime determined the length of time, with some offences such as blasphemy punishable by death. Victims were frequently displayed in public, where they were mocked and abused by enraged locals. And that's pretty much it for today's video, guys. Make sure to subscribe for more like this.